A tēnā rawara anō rā tātou e tātou mā nau mai, hoki mai haere tātou hoki tō mai, ki roto ki ngā kōrero taunaha tūpuna, taunaha whenua. Ngā kōrero o ngā whakataunga kleme, ngā kōrero whakataunga kleme o Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi, tēnā rā tātou piki kake haramai haere. Mauri ora, kahuri, don't ask me what happened there. I have no idea, and we were only about 10 or so or even 15 minutes into our kōrero. Everything was running fine and then all of a sudden, the cam just went off. No one touched anything. Perhaps it's some of those cyber criminals out there. There's a number of them, and that's one of the things I'm quite disturbed at too, is that a number of cyber criminals out there are actually from our super tribes, from amongst Hapu iwi super tribal groups, and it's quite disturbing that. So I take it that within the spite that they wield and the jealousies that they have, that they realise that they're not doing anyone any good or themselves any good at all, by firstly having the attitudes that they do and dealing with things in the way that they wish to, and secondly the actual act of spite and the actual the belittling nature of all of that sort of thing. The simple fact that they get off, they get off and actually rika noiho no taua tūāhua kia rātau. They enjoy that sort of thing. It is quite, not just alarming but disturbing as well. Whakarihariho hoki tērā tūāhua e tātauma. And so, if that was as a result of you cyber criminals, be well aware that you're doing no one any good at all. And trying to cut in on our kōrero is never going to stop us anyway. And everybody online knows that. And so, let's continue on with our kōrero on the Omani, the TeTiriti, the Magna Carta, where we were just about to get into what happened the evening of the first signing. The evening of the first signing was the time to bring in the actual English version, which once the actual, let's just go over there, once the actual conundrum, one that existed in that time, where sovereignty can be regarded in the culture of the crown, the Pākehā culture, the culture of Westminster, as also kāwanatanga in a certain respect. Well, none of the tūpuna mātua, especially the seniorships, none of them agreed with that. None of them agreed that it was acceptable, and especially after the first signing. It was, remember, after that first signing. And remember though too that by that time, the seniorships had sent their message of disagreement, total disagreement, and total disharmony and discontent with the whole nature and character of TeTiriti, of the old mini, of the Magna Carta. Now that's telling. That's really telling on the actual whole of the entreatment and what was going on there. Because if seniorships, these are made up of the most senior right across the land. If seniorships were totally opposing and hadn't signed and continued to disagree to sign the TeTiriti document, then that was really telling us something. You know why? Primarily, we think because te reo of TeTiriti belonged to us. It belonged to the most senior. So that, really told in itself exactly the simple fact that this whole entreatment wasn't to be trusted. However, all of the more junior, even though it were the junior descendants of them, the more junior that attended the actual signing. So still telling though, it still gives us the entirety of the idea and the message that they wanted to send to the Crown, that hey, this entreatment, this whole idea of trying to manipulate us with promises that may or may not be kept, we think they promised too much. See, this is the message that the seniorships sent them, and they were hurt at that. They were hurting by the evening. We think this assisted the Crown to bring forward the kōrero around the conundrum, and the simple fact that they wanted the signees to agree to that conundrum being a part of the entirety of the entreatment. See, so they were, in other words, through the first article where there is the dash, te kāwanatanga, to accept that as being in terms of defining exactly what the Crown meant, through that particular wording in the document in TeTiriti, that it needed to be taken as meaning sovereignty. This is how they should have written it in the English version, but they didn't. They didn't. They said outright, that we cede sovereignty immediately. And so when we look back at all the kōrero that we've just studied, when we look back at everything that we have just discussed over the past weeks, it becomes clear that here was the fraudulent act, concluded entirely. It was concluded right over the land, and that the 7 months to follow were supported and reinforced with acts that would, if committed to and obligated to by those who were servitudinal in many ways to the Crown. Oh, sorry, not to the Crown, the Crown at that time. That they would be able to secure the entirety of this fraudulent, corrupted, totally criminal deal. And it was one that the tūpuna still disagreed with. However, they still put it into the English version that our tūpuna mātua had ceded sovereignty, whereas when they signed legally, when they signed TeTiriti legally, actually they did not cede sovereignty. Okay, because remember the two sides to the meanings of our TeTiriti document in te reo. Remember that. So if they had have left it as te kāwanatanga, tituru, te kāwanatanga, then it would have meant a governance capacity. Governance capability to the capacities the capacities, the same as were existent in their lands at that time. Okay, but however, that evening they changed it over. They had changed it over to align with the conundrum, which even though the Te Reo version could not be changed, they changed it on the English version. Now, by rights, the English version should have been counted out, but as it is a Magna Carta, document, the English version can still be counted in, if necessary. And if our Tahumaakaakanuimatua were being said at that time that they handed over sovereignty, of which they didn't, but no one knew that. No one knew that, right? Yeah, you get the picture, don't you? You get the picture. Now, yeah. However, e tātou mā, TeTiriti, the old money, the Magna Carta, was a fraud, and it was entirely worked upon as an illegal entreatment, whereby the Crown representatives in the country that led and took charge and had sole responsibility for the entirety of this entreatment. We cannot blame the missionaries, who obviously helped out unwillingly too, I might add, and very insecure in the simple fact that they had no right of refusal in the end. Look, definitely acts committed to by the Crown, and e tātou mā acts which committed our seniorships, the most senior from right throughout the country, Moai Hapu iwi, Dawa Hapu iwi, and Tahumaakaakanuimatua o Tutura Hapu iwi, the most senior of the country, who had refused to sign. Okay, so this remained a sore point to try to win one over. We think they pushed forward really hard that evening once they brought in the English version, and we think it was delayed as a result of that, as a result of the seniorships refusing the signing of TeTiriti. Okay, a big thing. Yeah, remember me saying that in the last kōrero on TeTiriti, on the old mani, on the Magna Carta. I said to you, that's a biggie, and it is. It's a huge, yeah. It's, yeah, without that, the gravity of the loss of mana, of the entire, of the steel, was far too big to recover. Okay, and so, yeah, you can see what truly happened there, can't you? If you didn't see that before on our last kōrero, you would see that now. Okay, you would see that now, because e tātou mā, it was a biggie. You have the seniorships there, and it was a biggie when they refused to sign. They would have tried to show that this was not such a biggie. Okay, and that's actually been the case right throughout history. Everyone's thought that the Crown was in total control. Everyone's always thought, yeah, sovereignty was obtained just like that. Everyone, yeah, quite comfortable and quite happy to say, oh, because these are people from Westminster and from amongst the Crown, these are representatives of the Crown. After the many weeks that we've endured, we've persevered through a number of weeks, and I say many because I think there's about 6 or 7 weeks now. That's a lot of weeks of looking at the illegalities, the corruption, the collusion, the lack of ethics, and the non-transparency in the whole of the entirety of the entreatment around and the whole of the event around the first signing. And then you saw exactly what happened from right throughout all of the 7 months to follow. Okay? The Crown was still sore from right throughout that 7 months. They were very sore because they couldn't get the seniorships. They hung out in the north, not just because they were slightly afraid of being found out, of being revolted against. There could have been a revolt right across the motu. They were hoping for, peace to be kept up, especially after the war. Now, the likelihood was that they were quite confident that there wasn't going to be a war as such. Why? Because, our Tahumaakaakanuimatua had just finished one. Okay? 1816, I think it was, 1816 to 1840, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 39, 42, about 24, 25 years, 25 to 26 years almost of war, musket war. They had just completed, and for some about 22, because they fought with the old traditional weapons in the first 4 years. Okay? Amazing, eh? Amazing our understanding once we understand the situation entirely. Okay? Do these things apply to He Whakaputanga 1835, the Declaration of Independence? Yes, they do. Yes, they do, because they are the result of what was being aimed for, where as regards the He Whakaputanga 1835 document. And we've got a copy of that to share with you today, and our actual version of, a copy of the te reo version of that, and our actual translation of that to share with you today. Now, we're going to have to keep to the 2-hour limit on our kōrero today. Yes, I can't go over today, so I'll try to get through as much as I can, but what we've planned for is for the first part. There are 4 parts to the declaration. We might get in the first part today, and our kōrero around the first part. Okay, so that's where we're beginning. Then we go into we're going into e tātou mā, some of the fallout as a result of the fallout. Okay, and then we're talking around the years leading up to the declaration. That's 1832, 33, 34. Okay, very key years to think about what was happening. The musket war was still going on. Again, we have those situations with Te Runanga ko Huiara, which is very, very successful worldwide. Part of the greatest economy in the world in those years. However, the musket war is still raging hard. Many of our ancestors at this time are taking refuge, okay, whilst all the rest are now those perhaps who hadn't done much in the trenches or battled around the country with the musket were now having their turn. Okay, and then things lasted until 1839, 40, 41, 42, where everything slowly dwindled down. The Crown got word of things around 1838, 39 and started to organise what we think started to organise for TeTiriti. Can we get the evidence to prove all of those things? These are not just assumptions that we're making. These are clearly areas that we can find more evidence on. These are areas we already have evidence on that we know we can find more. We just have to do the work. A lot of that kōrero will go into also our, I did say in the next 5 to 7 years we've got a number of publications coming out, and a couple of large publications, very, very big publications on the heritage, on the taunaha tūpuna, taunaha whenua, everything pertaining to Tahumaakaakanuimatua, including our ancient heritage, all the way forward through the Middle East, through Asia, Western Asia, Eastern Asia, and of course Southern Asia, and then into Pacifica, into the Pacific Ocean areas there. Okay, the kingdom of Pacifica. And so e tatauma, we get to that certain point in our kōrero today where we will start to build into the time of the declaration. Now, I know what a lot of you are probably expecting. You're probably expecting that the illegalities that exist in the time of TeTiriti and around TeTiriti and what happened from right throughout TeTiriti and the signing and all the other signings and all the corrupted and collusive aims and objectives and the targets that they sought and where they failed. And this remained a sore point with the Crown because they failed to obtain the seniorships. If we look at all of that situation, we learn that perhaps the Crown had built up over that time between 1835 into 1839, 1840, a confidence that was somewhat overconfidence, more or less. They had suckered themselves in, really. They were overconfident in terms that they thought that, if we can get the reo to look as sharp as possible and to hit the native ear like we want it to manipulate everybody in sight that attends, and especially the seniorships, but everybody's just as important, just as much a priority. But if we can get that deal sharp and delivering that direct deal that we want to make with these people, we should be fine. So they were confident. They obviously had some deals going down with some of the tūpuna, perhaps mātua, who had helped them with this particular document and with the reo that was in it. Okay, this is another area that we think we can prove. Okay, because this deal, for the standard of their reo that we know of, under quite a fair bit under the level 1 of that time, we know for a fact that it's possible that they did not gear up the straight deal that we have here. They got someone else to mentor or to peer over the reo of the document to ensure that it hit the native ear, and te taringa hapu iwi, te taringa reo take, as best as could be, in order to manipulate fully. And that's what TeTiriti was all about. It was highly manipulative. It wasn't the duping that a lot of people say that it was, because it didn't need to be. He whakaputanga took care of all of that. Okay, and just going back to my earlier point, where it's possible that many of you do in fact think that you you wouldn't expect too much shenanigans or illegalities or corruption or even non-transparent or unethical practices going on with the declaration with He Whakaputanga 1835, and yet actually e tatou mā sad news in that respect. It's actually just as bad. Okay, it wasn't in order to achieve the same. Well, that's arguable. That's arguable as to whether it was out to achieve the same thing, because, as we've said before, He Whakaputanga 1835, the Declaration of 1835, the Declaration of Independence of our nation, of the independence of our nation, internationally, we've said it was a precursor to TeTiriti, and indeed it was. But its objectives and targets were largely slightly different. It was slightly driven towards taking perhaps those first steps indeed towards being able to achieve a rip-off deal, achieve a fraud, and carry it right through to the finish successfully. If you look at He Whakaputanga 1835, after we've studied it in probably the next 2 to 3 or maybe even 4 weeks, because that's how long we'll probably take to get through He Whakaputanga 1835, what you will find, e tatou mā, is that you're probably going to find that is the case. Okay? Largely, it was drawn up in order to prepare for what was to come. Okay? And so a lot of that kōrero, yes, we look to straight after we start to build up into those years, and then finally into the event of 1835, where the declaration was brought together at the hui, whereby the event took place, and where everything began to happen. However, quite slow was it to be, as we've mentioned before, quite slowly it got signed by the 50 signatures that signed the He Whakaputanga 1835 document. But however, the illegalities, the corruption, the non-transparency, we need to acknowledge all of that. We cannot deny. I mean, for years and years and years too, He Whakaputanga 1835 has been talked about, discussed, debated, you name it. Even a lot of people want it shut out, like some people of the National Party. Look, we totally disagree. And te wakaminenga o te runanga ko huiara totally disagrees with that as well. Okay, He Whakaputanga 1835 should not be cut out. It was a part of the same cycle of entreatment that was happening during that time, from between 1835 and 1840, which took place, and that for 7 months after that first signing was taken throughout the country in order to secure the entirety of the fraud, the entirety of the corrupted activity that was taking place during that time, in the event of TeTiriti from right throughout the country. They needed those signatures from right throughout the country. They needed the missionaries and the traders and those others that were largely servitudinal to the Crown representatives in the country at that time, to obtain those signatures. And they did. They went all out. Yeah, I saw that. As a result of the evidence that we have, all of the kōrero points to that. They went hard out. They were hard out. And so was the Crown in the north as they remained in the north. Yeah, slightly afraid, but, they were sore. They were hurting. They were hurting because they did not get the seniorships. Big deal, eh? Big deal. Well, they knew that those with the lead, those who had held power, balance of power, within our cultural, spiritual, super tribal way of doing things, were the seniorships. They knew that if they could win them over in the whole of the deal, they had this battle won. And it was always a battle for them from the 1770s, 1780s, 1790s, and even from 1815 at the first sitting of Te Wakaminenga o Te Runanga ko Huiarau, where they went into there disagreeing with the governance model that we had running at that time. From that point in time, they disagreed. They wholly disagreed. They wanted 100% of the power. They did not agree to the 50% power. And that was agreed to and promised, that was a target, that was a name, and that was going to be retained in the original intentions of TeTiriti. Okay? He whakaputanga is no different. Totally corrupted aims. Totally collusive, the targets in there. And, what can I say? These Crown representatives, whether we think they were acting independently of the Crown in Westminster or not, we don't think that that's important. I mean to say the part where we don't think they acted apart independently of Westminster. We do think that they acted impartial of Westminster. We don't think that that's the important thing. The important thing to remember here is that they were representing Westminster. They acted on behalf of Westminster. So regardless of how they were acting, they were still acting with Westminster. And especially with Hobson, once he got into the country, and we think it was 1835, and it had to be 1835 because I've since doing our last kōrero had a good look through our documentation, our evidence around he whakaputanga and the actual document and the actual translation. And we'd be doing well because the first parts of our kōrero around those documents, reinforcing also the kōrero leading up to the event, the whole of the event. Still those situations never changed in 1840. However, when we look at TeTiriti, what we find is that, however, there appears to be a change in the Crown. Now, most of our tupuna mātua that attended the first signing, they actually signed. So they took it, change is possible. And the seniorships went, nah, forget it. Okay? And we can say safely as we go into, once we've led up to 1835 and we actually get to 1835 and we talk around, we've got a little bit of a summary of details around where we thought, once we had done our translation, where we thought things had built up to, and we sort of summarized the whole situation around the event at that time. We will go into that kōrero before we start to get into the actual translation. Hopefully by then, and we're almost coming up to to the end of our first hour. It's a pity we had that little break in between, but we didn't mess around for time, and so it looks like we're still working pretty much well within time. So we'll go just over, perhaps around about 20 past 4 maybe. We will wrap this one up around about 20 past 4. That's just over the time that we started, which was 10 past 2. Okay, that'll give us our 2 hours. I need to keep to that because I've got lots of other work I need to be getting on with. So yeah, no capability of going over time today. Okay, so that's where we'll go into with our kōrero after that, and then we're into the actual translation, and we'll have a good hard look at that first article. We call them articles in the actual declaration, the actual document itself. Again, we've done the same as we did to TeTiriti. When we translated that, we looked at all the translations in history and we put big crosses through the whole entirety of them and said, eta, e harakau, e hakekau, e nei I te tino mea